Incremental readings. That is the 8th section of the Pleasurable guide to SuperMemo, the Fluency cycle. And it's about components. Now that we know elements and registries, now we niche down. Within an element, we have components. So we'll introduce the components, component menu, they have their own menu, modes, presentation, editing and dragging mode, number tags, preview of all component types, like elements, they have types. The components also have types. We're only going to cover 3 in the Fluency cycle: text, HTML, and image. There are plenty more. Then we will see the color-coded component, the color-coded status. There's meaning, some properties of the components, display add, then the element times, which go in consonance of the display add times, the display add property. It's not as easy as you may be familiar with Anki, that is front and back. We have at browsing, at question, at answer, and after grading. And this will make a difference. Then some of the features of fit sizes, fit images, style components, alignment and size. This is usually only done as a previous step to save this as a layout, but not necessarily. Then we'll introduce the component order, which have a direct effect in the component operations, understanding the attributes, navigating through components with a keyboard, adding components, swapping question and answer, deleting components, and then some details like view file and import file that today, now, it's not that relevant, but it's because it's this context, in the same context of the section. It doesn't hurt doing this a little ahead of time just because we are in the precise context. It's just a few minutes extra. So by the end of the section, you will be able to get familiar with the element, the components, the component types that are more relevant, how they work, how you can create or delete them. Most of the basics. This is an example that here there's many more that we don't cover, but it's on the diminishing returns. We already got most of the value with just a tiny selection. Let's start the section. So we start a new section about components. So every element in SuperMemo can have components, and it may have components, because you can have 0 components if you want to. That's actually the case of, let's say, here. There's only a background color. There are no components. Okay. So let's just start just by defining what is a component. A component is a container for objects placed within a visible field of the element. You remember what is this visible field of the element? Is the element display area. So whatever container there is, that will be a component. This that you're seeing now, it's a component. This, that is the same thing, it's the same text, but it looks different, it's also a component. Different size, distribution, but it's the same component. Here we have multiple components. 1, 2, 3, and a 4th that is an image. And if I go to a different place, this is also a component. It's a very big component. Then there are many different component types, how they behave, the properties they will have, how you create them, how you remove them, how you interact with them, when they are visible. There's plenty of stuff. So we'll cover all of this in this section. Most of it, sorry, not all of it. Why? Because there are some components super obscure that we will see only on the mastery track much later, after we have tackled everything about incremental reading. But for now, that is enough, just to present components. And if you ask me, yes, there's a limit. An element can have up to 100 components at the same time, regardless of the type. So can be 100 images, 50 images, and 50 text components, or any combination, but are limited to 100, which is usually absurdly enough. So now it's time to pay attention to the menu, the component menu. In this case, it's the menu, component menu of an HTML. Since you have text, you have a lot of stuff to do, reading, and also text, and so on. If it is like this, now I force it. This is an example of a text, plain text. So you see I don't get as many options here. If I go to the image, I get a slightly different menu, but it's always the same menu. Then, how do I access this menu? You can manually navigate with the mouse to the physical space and then right click. And as easy as that. Then, that you want to go mouseless approach, easy. Edit, menus, but hey, what happens is that the component menu, Alt F12, now it goes here, but which one has been pressed? The first one. That is a limitation. What if I want the image? In this case, I have more than one component. Then I will need to navigate, and now that I selected, now Alt F12. And now I have the component menu. Then there are a few ways you can navigate components. We will see this later on in this section, only for the mastery path, but it's possible to do. So if you want to automate this without the hotkey and so on, this can also be done. So that's all you need to know for now, the menus, and we will see most of the stuff. For instance, for the images, we'll have a dedicated section just for the image components. For the HTML components, we'll have yet another one just for this, almost, only for this. And now for the reference. And here will be like 2 sections or so. So imagine how complex there is, that there will be like 5 different sections on top of this one to cover what you can do with those menus. It's a big deal what you can do. And this includes Fluency. There will be other niche content with mastery that goes beyond that. Plenty of stuff. But for now, we only need to know the existence of the menu, the name, component menu, knowing the fact that it is specialized for the content of its component type, and how to access it. We achieved this goal for now. Before we proceed further, we need to know the state of the element in order to have the state of the components. So what you see here, usually if I say nothing or I do nothing, this is what's called the presentation mode. So how the element is presented. Nothing more than that. If it was a genuine repetition, how it will be seen, right? But I can change this mode. If I right click, do you remember this menu is the element menu? I can go to components, mode, and I have presentation mode, the one I already have by default, editing and dragging. And I can switch with Ctrl+E. Do you see now? All of the components have the border. Ctrl+E. Now I can drag and drop. Ctrl+E once again. Presentation, editing, drag and drop. So remember, editing is the second one that I will get, and dragging is when it's this sheet of gray to rearrange them. That are called modes. This mode applies to actually the element, but affects the components. That's why we are seeing this now. When you're going to use it, when you want to do something with the components, actually. What will be the use cases? We're going to see this later, not now. So let's continue with the modes. What is the presentation mode? What do you mean by presentation? Is you do a slideshow presentation, like a PowerPoint presentation? Do you mean this? It has some nuisance. It's not as easy as that. If I right click a component, display ad, we will see this later on. But this editing, dragging, browsing, question, answer, and grading. There's no ad presentation. Is this the same thing as browsing? Let's see. So the presentation mode is the default, how it looks. That doesn't mean what you see in the presentation mode is what you will see when you do the repetition, genuinely. I'm going to do something that we will see in the coming videos, but just to prove my point. I right click, display ad, and I uncheck this. Boopsie doopsie, the image is gone. Then let me cycle. That's the edit mode, I can see the image. The dragging mode, I can see the image. And the presentation mode, I don't see the image. That's because now, and that is a big difference that many people don't get it in SuperMemo. That is not the presentation mode on the repetition time. Because now this is just an element I went through by clicking. It's not executing the repetition, like if I click on Learn. If I click on Learn and this appears, I will see the image. I can actually force this. I can force the cycle repetition. Like this is, do you see now it says next repetition instead of learning? That is how I know I'm executing the repetition. I'm simulating the repetition, not executing it. So it won't be locked. And now I see the image. That's because now I am executing the repetition. That is a big difference, if I cancel now, on the regular case. That I'm displaying the element, but I'm not executing its repetition. Therefore, the presentation mode is binded to some states of components when they are displayed at. We will see this on its own video. Now the point was that it makes a difference that you think that the presentation mode is static, always the case, you see everything. Not necessarily the case. So take this as a takeaway from this video. So we have seen already the presentation mode. Now it's time for the editing mode. You now see this border. Those borders are telling you that this is now editing mode. Then it has the same effect. If now I go to the presentation mode and now I press Q, in this case I'm only going to edit one component. And you can notice that by its border. Or it could be another component, like this. I can just click if I want to. And press escape, and it becomes presentation mode once again. But I can actually Ctrl E, and the difference is that instead of just one component, is all of the components become in the editing mode. That's the difference. Because now, let me force it. I go to presentation mode and I click. I'm still in presentation mode. Let's do that. Here we go. The only thing the presentation mode does is deselect the component, but I can do it once again if I want to. Or I can cycle and select the image, or this one, or this one. We will see the use case of this cycle, and actually how you cycle, why it's like this, and not first, second, and so on. That is a component order from a different video. So what's the purpose of this mode? To edit. So even if I could achieve the same thing by just one, then cycling, edit this one, no, I will edit everything. But some exceptions apply depending on the component type that we will see shortly. So there's something unique for the HTML components that it will be the most common that you will have. I can resize the image component. And most of the components we will see that can be resized on the editing mode. But that's not true for the HTML components, for whatever reason. Those can only be resized or reshaped on the dragging mode. So take this into account. That what you do, let's say I want to make this the same width. I cannot go to the editing mode, it won't work. But I can do it if I have multiple images. That, hey, I want the image to be precisely the same width, more or less. Here you go, right? Hey, I cannot do this with HTML components. I will need to do the dragging mode instead. So more or less that is all you need to know about this mode. Usually, if you ask me, I will only use it when I'm working with templates. I want to modify a template, or I want to create a brand new template. And other than that, with the incremental link flow, so usually you will have just one HTML component that I want to resize it, stuff like this, and so on. Other than that, so in this case, what's going to happen? If I want to enter to the, it's an article, right? So this shows up now, then I just edit it. We'll see what's the key binding for this, but I just edit the component. So yes, I can achieve the same result with Ctrl+E. In this case, I have two images, two image components that are empty. The only use case that this allows is if I want to move this around. But if I only want to edit text, so here I want to modify the text and so on, the editing mode is useless. Well, it's not required. It's an overkill. So for now, we will say that the editing mode is just for convenience when playing with templates. So we have seen already the presentation mode, the editing mode. Now it's time for the third, the dragging mode. In older SuperMemos, this is called size drag or drag and size mode. So there are three names. We have the dragging mode, which is the official name, also named as drag and size, but again, in the user interface, we can still have the size drag mode. So even if you use SuperMemo up to 19.1, it's still outdated. So remember, if you see size drag or whatever, means dragging. Even if it's the same version of SuperMemo, the same icon, here it says size drag mode, Alt-click twice, and the edit toolbar. The exact same icon says dragging mode with Alt-click twice, while here it's dragging and here it's size drag. It's SuperMemo. Then, when is this useful? Yes, first, how you access it, remember, Ctrl+E twice to cycle through the states, or you just can click here and you bypass the cycle. You set it already. And as its name implies, is that you can drag and drop. You can rearrange where they appear. Just to let you know that there are features to have this done automatically, in the sense that I don't need the precision of a surgeon to make this pixel perfect. There are some features you can trigger to make them on the same width or make the same height. So whatever is higher, match that height, or whatever is narrower, match the width. Only affect images, or so almost everything, any combination can be achieved. But if you want to do it by mouse, which is what I suggest at the beginning, feel free. That now is, although they are overlapping, let me put it here. Or you can also change it, that now this will be at the top and this at the bottom. So now it appears different. I'm once again on the presentation mode. So now I will do it like this. And spoiler alert, something we will see, that you can automatize this through templates, so you don't have to move components around manually. Just to advance, that if you use templates, that now is not the case because it's not template, you will affect every single element that is binded. It's using that template. That's because some users, beginning, they play with this, pam, pam, pam. Ah, yeah, now I get it. And oh, shoot, I have modified almost all of the topics in my collection without knowing this. So we will see how you can avoid that. There are actually many ways to avoid that. But that is enough for now. Remember, drag and drop, it's only for the purpose to rearrange components, especially if they are overlapping or it looks off, you want to adjust the position, and that's it. Well, there is yet another trick that we will see later on. Do you remember that the image before could not be seen? Like I will do once again. So one of the ways that you can see any element is by changing the editing mode or the dragging mode. And this is convenient because in this case you can still see it here. But there's yet another trickery that you can have components that are hidden, are never visible. So the only way you can see what it actually is in the element display area is by this mode, the dragging mode. This is a very obscure use case, but just to let you know that in case it's required, or perhaps it's out of bounds, it will be in your secondary screen, but that screen is not there. How you can recover it or whatever, that's how you can do it. What we are going to see now is one of the features that are only available on the toolbar. In the element window, remember the control bar, in the bottom panel, control bar, and more specifically on the compose toolbar, there's one option that says display component number tags. Here you go. This is especially useful because you can see visually not the content, but what they do. First, I can see already it's 1, 2, 3, and 4. Hey, I thought it would be 1 and 2. So the 4 will be the second. And then the image and a third component, HTML component. So first, you can see the element type. In this case, it's HTML, HTML, 3 HTML, and 1 image. Awesome. So this is useful to know first how many there are, the type, and then what is called the registry member. In this case, it's linking a registry from text. And in this case, here it's linking an image from the image registry. So we will see what do we mean by registry. But the focus now of this feature is just the tag. So now I can, if I want, I can rearrange them just visually, or if I want, I can change actually the order. It's something we will see in the coming videos. Remember, you can only get here by this button 1, 2, 3, the tags. What you can do with the key bindings is the order, but this is a slightly different feature. So now it's time to introduce what's called the component type, because there are different types in SuperMemo. We have seen the image component. Here, it's like a website, is an HTML component. It has text that is rendered as HTML. And this is just plain text. It's a text component. But there are more. Which one there are? We can go to Compose toolbar in the element menu. We have all of them, all of those. We will see each video dedicated to each one of those on the mastery track, and only the ones I mentioned already in the fluency track, because the other ones are not relevant for incremental reading. For fluency are irrelevant. So HTML, which is basic. It doesn't have all of the features of a website. Then plain text. Then we have what's called rich text that is just left for compatibility reasons. Don't use that ever. Then this one that says AB, what is that? Let me activate the spell pad. This is only for items that you want to check the spelling. So on the question side, you have the opportunity to input, and it will compare the input with the saved string. Image component, as we have seen already. Then sound component. You can play sounds in SuperMemo. We're not going to see this on the Fluency, by the way. You can have both, just sounds, very short, like for language learning, just Pleasurable, or how you pronounce Pleasurable, whatever. Or could be a podcast, audio-only podcast of a few hours long that you will process incrementally. There are those two flows, more or less. Then, video component. That doesn't mean YouTube. YouTube will use HTML component. It's a special, but it's embedded. And video, it's literally a video. It's local. You have the file on your computer. Then this that looks like a PDF is not necessarily a PDF. It's just a binary component. That means everything that is zeros and ones in your computer can be anything. Obscure usage. Then we have a script component. You can execute some scripts, very basic primitive scripts in SuperMemo. Ultra obscure. We will see this only at the end of the mastery track on its own section. The only object. That means that perhaps you have an Excel file and you can see it there. So you could see the columns and the values and so on, and you could edit this in SuperMemo and will sync with the file you have. Obscure as well. And then we have those shapes: elliptic, rectangular, and rounded rectangular. That is just for image occlusion. I don't know why it's distinct. So you can choose different colors, by the way. It doesn't have to be those one. But if you want the round shapes, no, it's a different shape. It's its own component. These are all of the components you can have in SuperMemo. 11. If we take the shapes as one, there are 11 different component types. This has been just the overview. And remember, in the Fluency, we'll bother about 3. HTML, plain text, and image. Nothing else. So I didn't want to visualize all of them. I did that on purpose. Because it's just to bring to your awareness, hey, this exists. So if you ever hear this, I say this on the videos, or in the menu, you read this, or in the documentation, you have read about this, oh, you know what it is. And now you know you should not care about this unless you want mastery. So it's intended. Purposely, I don't want to show that to you. Unless it's a dedicated section for that. So let's focus now on the image component. So it can be an image, a picture, a photo, whatever, but the official name is image component. Then you see here, once I hover, as long as I have the hints activated, I will have the name, the size, the resolution, the date, where it is in my computer. Usually will be where you have your SuperMemo collection, then systems, the collection name, elements, and whatever it is in the tree. Then elements, which is 1, that's very fascinating, and is one of the pros to use an image registry. It tells you in how many elements this image is currently on. We will focus that later on, but I could reuse this image if I wanted to. And then we have the menu. Yes, we have seen this menu, but this is more specifically, it's not the component menu, it's the image component menu. So you have a ton of things we can do with images. It's crazy. We have its own dedicated section just for that. And most of the menu here, it's the same. It's shared among all of the menu type. Component menus of different component types. So you can resize, zoom in, zoom out, transform, and do whatever. Then this could be useful. You see, by the way, this is an example that this image is being used in 25 elements. Images are super useful because could be the case that, hey, I have all of these from the same place. I extracted this from the same source. So the image is acting like a token. Sometimes if it's a flashcard, it's because the image is actually required to answer the question. Like could be this one. Well, it's still, I don't have this in item form yet, but I will very ask, hey, which step is this or whatever. Shit. For instance, you can have an image that is actually required for the flashcard. Like, hey, in the brain regions of this scan, the darker the issue, and we will see the flow that you can do this on topics, and the image will get inherited. That's why now it sounds like, hey, it's not a big deal, it's just images, right? I can have images in the flashcards. There's nothing fancy about it. Yeah, but in incremental reading, the image component, it's so convenient because it gets inherited, you can reuse it, and this allows a lot more different flows. Meaningful and semantic flows. But this is just the introduction of the component. So now it's going to present the component you will use the most often in SuperMemo, and it's the HTML component that you can have like a website, colors, size, different fonts, even images within the text and stuff like that, right? So you can use CSS to style this. That's why I have this title red. There's a style. We will see this later on each dedicated section. And here is when I can play with colors. That, hey, what is extracted of the reference? It will be this color, this size, and so on. And here instead of red, I can have, I don't know, blue. And here you go. Not just this, everything, all of the components using this style will become blue as well. So when you import an article from the website, like this, now it looks slightly different. It's not vanilla, because I apply my own styling, because it's easier to read like this. And you have hyperlinks and all of that. You will see that, not in my case, I prefer to have the flashcards in plain text, just my preference. But if you keep HTML, which is the default, let me do it for the sake of the example. So I make a quick example of, hey, do you see? Now it looks like plain text, like this. But if I apply a different template, now A is still HTML. Okay. No worries about now the templates. Again, we will have a dedicated section for templates. It will come later because it's not the focus. First is to understand SuperMemo, how it works, to use incremental reading, and then you will make it pretty. But the point is that, hey, that was a close relation to what I just did, but since this is still HTML, I can click and open this on the browser. It's super cool. Super cool. So remember, HTML, to simplify, means like a website. It won't look exactly as on the web, exactly how you see it on the website, but it will be a lot more convenient. And you have hyperlinks. You can actually links. It allows other flows that we won't see on the Fluency track, but you could link other elements in your collection via hyperlinks and all of that. This requires HTML. Then, to simplify, if you don't touch anything, all of the text you have in SuperMemo will be an HTML component. Everything. But as we will see, that doesn't mean that SuperMemo stores that on a file, on an HTML file. For instance now, if there were no hyperlinks here, like this, spoiler alert, do you see the background color? It's blue, and here, okay. Do you see? This is what? Is an HTML component? Yes, the answer is an HTML component, but it's being used as plain text. That's why if I open the source, it's a temporary file, because the file doesn't exist. I wanted to show that to you is rather important, but because in the Fluency track we are not going to cover those details, it will make a difference sometimes that, hey, I understand how the HTML component works, is because it can be reused as if it was just plain text. Remember this detail. In case you want this and dig further, I suggest to switch to the mastery track. Then, the menu is crazy. You have a lot of options. crazy. Yeah, just to let you know, for references, its own section. Linking, its own section. The styling will have its own section as well. And the fonts in the mastery. Then in the reading, extracting, its own section. In the Fluency, everything is in one go. It's the incremental reading loop, extracting, importing, extracting, and closing. And in the mastery track, there are so many videos. In its case, like there are like between 50 and 100. Extracting, its own section. Splitting, its own section. Closing, its own section. So in order to see the power of this menu, what you can do with the HTML component, I could perfectly guess I already have more than 400 videos ready for that. It's a big deal. It's the most important component, and it's the most important component type, and the most versatile, the more powerful. That's why I spent more time for this. So remember, HTML component, even though the L is not in the interface most of the time. So we have seen the HTML component and the image component. The other one we will see for the Fluency is the plain text component, or just text component. You can neglect it if you want, but there are some perks. That's why I still put it in the Fluency. And because, as we have seen in the previous video, sometimes you will actually use text, even though the component is an HTML component. That's why you have this menu. Then, this is a different, it's an item, but hey, it looks more simple, right? Yep. Do you see? You only have the background of one color, and the border, if you notice, it's white. I didn't mention that explicitly because there was a lot of information already, but in the HTML video, in the HTML component, it's blue, and when it's out of focus, it's yellow. If I click, it's blue. If I press escape, yellow again. Awesome. Then, if I right click, hey, the menu isn't exactly the same. Are you sure about that? Reading, text. It's not the same, but it's pretty damn complete. We have the links, all of the text, and all of the reading that you can do. So for the incremental reading, it's actually a good choice. Not for topics, because you cannot have hyperlinks and so on, but for items. There are some advantages of our HTML components. We'll discuss this later on, but just to let you know, that could be the case that you don't know, but if you buy a collection, you will be using this. That's why I also included. What made me include the plain text component is because if you buy any collection from SuperMemo, you will have the plain text component. That's why. So we'll see in the fonts, text in the Fluency is with fonts and text. A few videos about that. And in the mastery track, its own section, because there's a lot more detail to go through. So remember, HTML component. Some people when say text component, they refer to the HTML component in reality, because the text component is this one. You see, just say text, and the HTML say HTML, doesn't say text component. And some other people say text component to the three. There's another one, the rich component, RTF, that we're not going to cover in the Fluency. It's obsolete. It's just left for compatibility reasons. People who have collections, or old collections with this type, they can still use modern versions of SuperMemo, basically. So that's all you need to know for now about the plain text component. I usually will say plain text, even if it's just text, the name, so it's easier to distinguish. I'm talking about non-HTML component. Remember that for future videos. So now that we know already the components and the component types, now it's time to see one of the details that are quite useful, and are the border. The border of the components is color-coded. And especially the HTML component is kind of tricky, can have multiple colors. So you see now, if I click, I make the component active. Now the border is blue. If I deselect it, it becomes white once again. Okay. Now, if I do the title, it's blue, and it's blue, and the other one is blue, right? If I press escape, I deselect one by one. Nice. But what could happen if one actually doesn't have HTML at all? I will be using this one. So what I did, we'll see this later on, is that I removed the styling. Therefore now, if you happen to be a happy user of incremental reading, blah blah blah, this is plain text, but it's an HTML component. How do I know that? By the color. Now the background, more or less what you see at the top of my head, it's yellow. So it's an HTML component that is having plain text. And this, when it's blue, is an HTML component when there is actually HTML content. It's not plain text. Okay. Do you see that even if I deselect it, because now it's blue, because it's active. But as soon as I deselect it, it becomes yellow once again. So in other words, instead of white, it's yellow. That's it. And the color coding of blue just means it's active when it's an HTML component. Because if I select an image, the image just gets a white border, a quite thicker border, not blue. So blue just means selected in certain component types, not all of them. Awesome. So we have seen those two. Plain text inside an HTML component, yellow. When it's HTML code in HTML component, gray or white. It's slightly depends on you, but for me it's even white. There are more, like pictures, that I don't want to introduce this now, because we'll have a dedicated section of the course for images quite at the end, just to let you know that you can have green and red. They use like the traffic light coding to see in which state there is. If it's zoomed, it's trimmed, it's not cropped, all of those variations. We will see this later on. And then other components, remember we covered those three in the Fluency, but there are more in the Mastery. The remaining ones in SuperMemo. And the color coding may vary based on the component type and its current state. This is colored what? It's white. Therefore, it's an HTML component with HTML. I can know that by the bullet points. It's not plain text. Awesome. And then the sound component. Sorry, I made the image component. My mistake. Sound component. Okay. You can have the menu and so on. If I do the video, then you'll realize that, hey, it's the same as the image, right? You see in this case, it's the sound component. The border is gray because the background is already white, therefore it's gray. And underneath, it's a video component that is another shade of gray, even though the background is already gray. So remember, it's for HTML, it's always in color. For the other components, can be even gray, white, or different gradations of gray, usually quite light. That's all you need to know for now. And this is relevant because if I go, by the way, and the last thing is a text component, a plain text component. It will be white. And the answer, do you see? It's white. So far, rule of thumb. Most of the time the border will be white or kind of gray, doesn't tell you anything. But for HTML components, it's telling you, hey, there is no HTML, therefore SuperMemo, it's saving this as plain text, even though it's not a plain text component. And it does this to save space. And for images, we will see that, hey, is this image the original image? Or is zoomed in? Or it's cropped? Or something like that. How can I know that? Because of the color. I will do it just for the sake of the example. Do you see? Now the border is green. And some other case could be red. We will see this later on the dedicated section. Now we're going to see a feature in SuperMemo for components that could be quite interesting, especially for items, but it's not limited to items. And is the property of display add. For instance, the image. If I right click, there's an option, display add. And there are several options. At editing and dragging, it's grayed out. I cannot uncheck that. But they have 4 options: at browsing, on question, on answer, and after grading. After grading only applies to items, because you can only grade recall of items. On answer is the answer time, also only for items. And for the rest, so the 4 element types will have on question, so when it's shown, or at browsing. At browsing means when it's not during the repetition. For instance, using the browser, or just by clicking. So if I go to a random place, let's say the next flashcard, okay, that's the question, right? Because I'm doing the repetition. But now, if I manually go to somewhere else, do you see the answer is revealed? It's because this is the browser, the browsing time. Okay. Okay. So I just added the image. Then I'm in the browsing. So I will start the repetition. I force the repetition. That's the question time, the answer time. Okay. I see the picture at all times. What I can do is display add. I deselect question, and then it's nowhere to be found, because in the question time it's not there. And if I do Ctrl+T, I can still retrieve it. So it doesn't disappear. It just SuperMemo doesn't render that, but it's still there. I can cheat if I want to. And then I see the answer. You can do this with any single component, including actually, this is what is always the case with the answer. The answer that the display add, the question will be disabled, because you don't want to spoil the answer during the question time, right? Then there are more flows that for instance, the image is like too revealing. You want to keep it on the answer field instead, right? It's not required to answer the question. Awesome. But then after grading, let's do that. So now the image will be revealed only after grading. So that's the question, the answer, the image is still not there, and once I grade my recall, now appears. When would I want to do this? There are some flows. It's like it's extra information, or like something I do are memory pegs. The images are just pegs, for instance, that then you can access. And hey, do you see there are now 2 elements using this image? So I link those with the image. Stuff like that. In the mastery track, there will be this explained in later on sections. For now, this is only the point of display add. It's a property of every single component. For instance, you could have sound that is played, but not displayed. So you can hear the sound, but you cannot see the panel. Remember, one thing is display at, something else is play at, that we will see on the mastery track of the course. We will start to cover what are the times or modes in SuperMemo. For instance, this that you see, most of the time you see this is the browsing mode. How I know that? Easy, because I manually click there to go here. If I click on Learn, I will go to a flashcard. This is the question time of the flashcard. I reveal the answer. This is the answer time of the flashcard or item. I grade my recall. You see now the button changes. And now this is a different stage, which is called after browsing. Why this is relevant? First, because there's a setting, display at, that we can customize this. That means that any component for any element, I can decide this will be shown only during the question, so not during the answer, only during the answer, not the question. That will be the case of the answer. The internal link, in this case, is the answer. Or I can reveal it only during after grading. Or the opposite, I can hide it after grading. Keep in mind that in SuperMemo, you see the question, you reveal the answer, and when you grade your recall, you don't go to the next element. Like in Anki. You grade your recall, and you see the question of the next card. Not here, because this is incremental reading. You have an opportunity to perform some actions. Like, for instance, adjusting the priority before moving on. There are two other options, is at editing and dragging. But those are modes. If you remember, we also covered that. That's the presentation mode. Could also be the browsing, because if I browse, I go here. It's the presentation mode of the element, but it's the browsing mode of the component. That's the key difference. The presentation mode is for the element entirely. And the browsing mode is specifically for every single component inside the element. Because the component it's bound to the time. Question time, answer time, after grading, and so on. Now we're going to see a feature in SuperMemo for components that could be quite interesting, especially for items, but it's not limited to items. And it's the property of display at. For instance, the image. If I right click, there's an option, display at. And there are several options. At editing and dragging, it's grayed out. I cannot uncheck that. But they have four options: at browsing, on question, on answer, and after grading. After grading only applies to items, because you can only grade recall of items. On answer is the answer time, also only for items. And for the rest, so the four element types will have on question, so when it's shown, or at browsing. At browsing means when it's not during the repetition. For instance, using the browser, or just by clicking. So if I go to a random place, let's say the next flashcard, okay, that's the question, right? Because I'm doing the repetition. But now, if I manually go to somewhere else, do you see the answer is revealed? It's because this is the browser, the browsing time. Okay. Okay. So I just added the image. Then I'm in the browsing. So I will start the repetition. I force the repetition. That's the question time, the answer time. Okay. I see the picture at all times. What I can do is display at. I deselect question, and then it's nowhere to be found, because in the question time it's not there. And if I do Ctrl+T, I can still retrieve it. So it doesn't disappear. It just SuperMemo doesn't render that, but it's still there. I can cheat if I want to. And then I see the answer. You can do this with any single component, including actually, this is what is always the case with the answer. The answer that you display at the question will be disabled, because you don't want to spoil the answer during the question time, right? Then there are more flows that for instance, the image is like too revealing. You want to keep it on the answer field instead, right? It's not required to answer the question. Awesome. But then after grading, let's do that. So now the image will be revealed only after grading. So that's the question, the answer, the image is still not there, and once I grade my recall, now appears. When would I want to do this? There are some flows. It's like it's extra information, or like something I do are memory pegs. The images are just pegs, for instance, that then you can access. And hey, do you see there are now two elements using this image? So I link those with the image. Stuff like that. In the mastery track, there will be this explained in later on sections. For now, this is only the point of display at. It's a property of every single component. For instance, you could have sound that is played, but not displayed. So you can hear the sound, but you cannot see the panel. Remember, one thing is display at, something else is play at, that we will see on the mastery track. So let's start with the display at options. In any component, display at, here I have all of those checkboxes. So at browsing, what does mean at browsing? It's when I'm not executing the repetition. So I'm not on the question time, and if it's an item, I'm not during the repetition cycle, on the answer or after grading. So if I uncheck everything, now this, the welcome to Pleasurable learning, should be only visible during the browsing in other context. Okay, it's visible, it's there. But as soon as I start the repetition cycle, it's gone. Because now I am on the question time. I click on learn and it appears once again. As easy as that. Now let's continue. Okay, I'm going to use this item. It was the next one. Okay. Then I will add the image, so it's more illustrative. Okay. Let's use this item as an example, because you know that the item has multiple times. So question time, answer time, and after grading. Awesome. And now, this is the browsing time. Okay. So then I will use the same with the image, display at only during browsing. So now I see it because I just went back here manually, like this. So now if I start the repetition, there's no image. What's the question? Blah, blah, blah. I recall, show answer, still not there. Then I have to recall. I have to grade my recall. And as soon as I do this, I grade it. I am on the after grading. So still is not checked. The box is not checked. Therefore, I'm not going to see the image at all unless I browse. So if it's in the knowledge tree, it's here. Here we go. Now I cancel the repetition and I am on the browsing mode. On top of that, that's the question time. But if I press Ctrl+T, I can still display Actually, in case you didn't know, you can display all of the components, including the answer. Because look at this, the button, show answer. I still didn't. And here you go. Okay. Then, when is this useful? Again, audio. Perhaps you want to play audio automatically, but without cramming the interface. So you don't want the audio component menu, play, stop, and all of that. It's an option. Or scripts and all of those. So perhaps I have a binary component. I don't want to take space to be even visible, but to execute every time I do the repetition. So when I browse, imagine that I browse and I need to wait until it is loaded. It takes a while. Therefore, what I do is no, don't even render it unless it's repetition time. If I do Ollie with an Ollie object like an Excel file, stuff like this, why would I want to see the Excel file while browsing? It will only make the experience slower, right? So in this case, it's very, very niche, but it's still possible, useful, that you want at browsing only, and it's not during the repetition, or the opposite, as I just said, that during the repetition, I want this, like the actual file, but not during browsing. So that means that now I see like there's no image at all, but when I do the rep, I will see it. It's the other way around. We will see the use cases on the mastery track only, because this is already like multiple steps into the diminishing returns already. And I'm making an effort just to tell you, not to show it to you, because I will need to tell you what's the Ollie object, what it is, how it looks. Way too much content to add just for this. It's not worth it. Believe me, it's not worth it. You can use incremental reading with space repetition and just worry about answer, and that's it. So the display add that you're going to toggle will be on question. And in case you use language, you will play on answer or after grading just for the audio. That's it. So now it's time to see the display at question time. This one, on question. You may think, hey, this is just for items, right? No. Non-items will have the question time. Actually, it's what they have. They lack answer and after grading. So when you do a repetition on a topic, it pops during your repetitions. It will be by default on question time. For instance, I just did one repetition, I executed the sub. Now I'm doing this repetition. I'm on what? I'm on a question time. That's why the next repetition is already a different element, because there's no answer to reveal or no grade to do, right? Awesome. In this case, I only have one simple HTML component, so it's not that illustrative. So now I do a repetition with topics that they have an image, right? So when I click on next, hey, in this case it's the very same picture is being reused, right? But what I can do is no. The display at, don't do on question. Then the next repetition, hey, it's still there because it's a different element. It's using the same picture. If I go back, this is the same topic, but I just navigated there. Therefore, I'm not on the question. I'm now on the browsing, if this makes sense. Why am I on the browsing? Because I'm not executing the repetition. I just moved there manually. You can do that by using the manually the knowledge tree or with the key bindings, as I just did. Then if I force the repetition, do you see now it says next repetition? I shall see the image. Display at on question. So literally, I'm not on the question time. If I now unselect all of those, so I only have browsing, oopsie doopsie, the image is not there now. If I go back, it's there. It's there because I navigated back. So as soon as I start the repetition, 3, 2, 1, now, it disappears. Now I'm simulating the repetition. That means that if it's a topic, I'm not going to see the image unless I navigate there manually. So not during a repetition. This has some flaws. It's very diminishing returns, but there are some advantages over that. But it's very different from an item. Okay, this is a very good example. Redact contains daily dose of vitamin K in what percentage? And I have a picture of radicchio, but it's not required to answer the question, right? So in this case, now I'm the answer time. I reveal the answer. What I can do is display at and deselect question. So now, if I simulate the repetition, it's not there, it's the question. And then, hey, okay, this could be useful if I want to reinforce, hey, what's radicchio because it's low frequency for me. Ah, yeah, it's that thing. I'm reinforcing this, but it's not part of the question. If I do, I will create a different flashcard that is just the picture, and the question will be, how do you call this vegetable in the picture? In that case, I will require the image at the question time. Awesome. Here I have a very good example. Here I'm asking an alternative name, also known as nightshade, and nomenclature in the scientific name, right? Which I don't care about the scientific name, by the way. I don't want to memorize it. That's why it's never on the answer. Hey, nightshades are also known as what? Bittersweet or woody nightshade. Gotcha. And I have a picture of some of them, some of the nightshade families. Okay. Then I can go to a different element, but this element doesn't have the picture now, and it says, Solanum is a large diverse genus of flowering plants, which include 3 food crops of high economic importance, which are what? Potatoes, tomatoes, and eggplants. Why now I have the picture? Because I decided that, hey, the picture is giving away part of the answer, or the entire answer, because I see the tomatoes here, right? Then, could be the case that this is an eggplant, but I don't even know to recognize the eggplant. The plant, the flower of the plant, only the fruit, right? Okay, so perhaps it's in my side, but my lack of knowledge prevents me from giving away the answer. If now I say, hey, this purple thing is the flower plant of the eggplant. Oh wow, massive deal. Let me not showing on the question. That is a very good example and one use case that I want to have the picture, but not during the question. Now it's time to see the display at on answer. Remember, it's not the same as having on question unchecked, by the way. On question unchecked means appears on the answer only. So it's hidden on the question. Let's see a flasher for that. So here's just a question. Then why I'm not seeing the answer? Because the answer, it's here, is displayed at, the question is empty. Okay. Then everything that on answer is checked, it will be seen during the answer. Then we will see some use cases, albeit kind of rare, that you may want on answer to not be displayed. Usually it's not because it's an image or a text, it's because it's a script component, you don't want to execute it once again, or if it's a sound component, you don't want to be seen or play at. Or the opposite, you want the answer to be repeated. Then, since on purpose I don't want to introduce audio in the Fluency track, here is quite limited. But just to let you know that, now let me repeat, that's the question time, it's the answer time. So what you can do is show the answer, show an extra image, now it will be dummy. Okay, so now this is a dummy image. Now, if I simulate the repetition cycle, it's on the question time and answer time. So I could say that no. Don't do it on the answer time. So now, remember, that's not the repetition yet. Now it's in the grading. Okay, let me restart. Question time, it's there. I'll show the answer and it disappears. Could be the case that you don't want to be distracted and so on. I mean, I don't think it's useful for that. Just so you know it's possible, but it's actually useful for other components that you may use, scripts or Oli, stuff like that, that they take a lot of. They take a lot of a screen, or they are slow to load, stuff like that. So I know it's not as illustrative. It's not as illustrative as it could be, but I do it on purpose because I don't want to introduce a lot of new stuff that I wanted to explain, just to share this. So remember, on answer, display ad, on answer, it is revealed. It will be the least useful one. We will see that after grading is actually more useful to play with than on answer. If you don't do language learning, it's virtually unrequired to use it. Let's continue with the display modes for components. Now the next is display ad after grading. Not during grading, but after you have graded. Meaning when you decide to recall one of the options, just after that, you don't go to the next element, unlike Anki. So that's an opportunity that you can trigger and hide or display other components. Then, does this affect topics, concepts, or tasks? Again, the same as answer, no, because you only have one time. Let's verify that. Oopsie doopsie, I wasn't expecting that. This is unexpected behavior from SuperMemo, because you'll realize, wait, if I don't have the answer, and unchecking the answer doesn't have any effect, as we did before, why on earth after grading has an effect? I don't know, but my best guess is because how it is designed, after grading means when it's waiting, when the button says next repetition. So even if you haven't graded anything, it still triggers. So remember this, even if theoretically shouldn't be triggered, it does trigger for every single element type, not just for items. Are there some use cases for that? Yes, extremely obscure that most likely most people will never ever use. That's why I'm not going to cover that now, only on the very end of the mastery course. Then, what about items? Let's follow the same example as before. Well, it's not exactly the same item. Okay, here is the flashcard that I have the image on the question side, time, and this one is on the answer. Okay, then an extra thing I could do, one example, is that as soon as I read my recall, let's say number 3, do you see now I have the next repetition button, the same by default with non-item element types. Now I could trigger something. I could trigger another image if I wanted, but one of the use cases would be to trigger a sound component, but it's not part of the question. I'm not asking, hey, how do you pronounce this word, because it's not common. Solanum, solanium, something like that, right? Solanin. So I could have this active component that, hey, perhaps I have a flashcard dedicated for its pronunciation, but I want to add it as an extra after the grading recall just as a reinforcement, as passive repetition. It's one of the examples I could do. Or I could show an extra component as is text on the side that is see also, or one analogy or one of my notes that I could only take a look in case I lapse. Therefore, I see the question, tomatoes, I don't know, radish and lettuce. Oh wow, I'm so off, right? And then after grading and saying, oh no, I completely failed. As soon as I see that, as soon as I do that, I will see the extra text. I'm not going to do it now, because this is just an overview of the element, the component display at after grading. So you could have a text component, HTML component, that disables all of those, question and answer, but only has after grading. One option. Or you could have, if you have a sound, depends on the case, you could have on the question an example sentence, and it reads the sentence, then you answer, reveal the answer, then you recall the grade, and once you recall the grade, the question audio repeats once again. So you can have on question and after grading, but not the answer. And this actually exists on the Advanced English Collection that you can buy. By the way, 10% off using my link in the description. But we will see this in detail, all of those flows, in the language learning section of the mastery track. So we're going to see now some features related to components, but those features are element operations, not component operations. So you know that I have, let's say here, 4 components, but I manually moved them, right? So is this the same height as the HTML component? By eye, more or less, right? But just to let you know that there are some operations you can do to actually verify that. So let's trigger. Right-click, Components, and Fit Sizes. It says, adjust the sizes of components to match the size of the current component. Meaning that all of the components will be adjusted to the current component. But what is the current component? There's none selected. If none is selected, it's the very first one. According to what? According to the order. In this case is Welcome to Pleasurable Learning. Okay. Then just for illustrations, I will make it even bigger. The order will be obviously smaller. So it's more obvious what I'm doing. Okay, so right click, Components, Fit Sizes. Here you go. But hey, it's not exactly what I thought, because the first 2 are bigger than the others. I wanted 50-50 instead, right? Well, you could achieve that with some other functionality, by the way. Instead of doing everything here, I already done that. So what I did is that I added an extra picture, so it's more illustrative, and all over the place, so it's easier to see where they align, how they resize, and all of the components, what they do, right? Okay. The image was the second, and the second image was the 5th. Okay. So what happens when I select Fit Sizes? Look at that. Then there's a second image, always, because sometimes you don't appreciate that. Let me use SuperMemo for that. Do you see if I click the image? Now it's the entire thing. But perhaps it's like this, and hey, it's the entire thing once again. But sometimes it's not obvious. In this case, it's not obvious, right? Because hey, it could have been, you could say, hey, it could have been wider. It is. It's just that the picture has a different ratio, but the component is to the end. That's why I added this second picture, which is the same, but selecting the image as components, so you see the actual border. And in this case, the second image, you see that has taken the entire width, well, most of the width. Okay. And what I did is that if I reverse the order, So now the images are fourth and fifth, but are reversed. The first was in the second position, pleasure learning, now it's the fifth. And the second, in the position 5, was the other one, agreeable burden. You could say, hey, it's the same. Yep, but one difference is that what image is taking most of the width. Now it's the opposite, it's the logo. And what is the difference between those two? Let me put them back to back, so it's easier to appreciate. So you see the difference? The second image takes full width, and now is the first image, the logo. So that is relevant that, hey, I don't care about the component order, right? Because when I do those features, hey, you do. In two ways. I did this on purpose. It's twofold. First, SuperMemo will get the order of the images, relatively speaking. So the first image component is Pleasurable Learning logo, and the second is Agreeable burden. So between them, the logo is first, the picture, the portrait is second. But among this, it's the number 2 and the number 5. So some operations that include HTML components and some other components, this will have an effect, and it will be different. For instance, it's not the focus of this video right now, but you will see it here. You see that it's the second and the fifth image, that's why the image is at the end. And here the two images are at the end, the fourth and the fifth. So this logo, it's in the middle, and here it's at the top. It's the only difference because of the component order. And the difference between tile components with the order, the logo being first and the logo being last, is that if you mix it, do you see, compare this one at the top to this one at the bottom on the screen. The logo, instead of being second, it's fourth. And that's it. Because the tile follows the order. First, second, third, fourth, and fifth. That's it. And with the images, if now we compare the top to the bottom, it's the same. But that's changing the order of the images. The logo is at the top, and the other case is at the bottom. So when the logo is the last, is that the last at the bottom, and when it's the first image component, it's at the top. And same when it's horizontal. So now I will scroll, so it just always top and bottom. The logo is to the left, and when it's the last, is to the right. And more or less in this case, both take equal width. Unlike the other cases that they take the all width. If you remember, here, that takes all of the remaining width, and the logo stays the same. In this case, it's even out. So that's why there are some surprises that, hey, nowhere in this documentation says, or why I should expect the empty space to be taken and divided equally, or to be ignored, and width is kept. So there are so many variables. At the beginning, I wanted to do standalone videos, but then I thought it will be too confusing for people if they watch one in isolation and then another one. Is what? Because there's some tiny details that out of sequence, bro, I don't remember exactly what you did. That, oh, it's just this border that is wider. Oh my God. That's why I wanted to have everything in one single go. So I know this is very intimidating. There are a lot of functionalities here. Fit tile components, fit sizes and images. And then the same, tile components and fit images, but in reverse order. So actually, what is interesting of fit sizes, that we have seen that from this, the images are kept the same. This is the result. So the image that was more to the right takes all of the remaining area, this is the same regardless of the order. So if we reverse the order that the logo is second, it happens the same thing. And this is only true on feed sizes. If we do images, then we have different behavior. Do you see? First is the difference is that they are the same images in the same order, but look, it doesn't take the full width. There's a lot of empty space. Do you see? It's not taken. Why? We have selected, regardless if we select just the images or the entire thing, selecting non-image components has no effect because we trigger fit images. So we cannot pollute anything. Okay. And if we change the order, so now the logo is last. So what's going to happen if we do the fit images in reverse order? Again, if we just click the images or everything doesn't have any difference, the same effect, look at what happens. The logo takes full width. So either none of them takes width, the first case, or the logo takes width. It's quite odd, right? Because you will think, hey, if the logo here is taking width, in their scenario, the picture will take width. But no, it's not taking it. And actually this happens, but when you do fit sizes instead. That's why I wanted to include the whole image, the big picture, so it's easier to track because, oh my God, it's not that intuitive at all. And on top of that, we have tile components that not necessarily are images. I can do just the images, and this is how it looks. It can be horizontally or vertically, your choice, or with our components. If we do it with our components, we're mixing text with images. So it's very likely we have a result we want, unless you really want that. Could be the case that you really want this thing. That's the difference between everything or just images. And just to let you know that this is what we cover in the Fluency track. It's SuperMemo. This goes a lot more complex than you can imagine. It's just a work in progress, by the way. But there's something you can trigger, alignment and size, and you can have all of those options. There are I think, 132 permutations. And here I'm doing all of the possible permutations of resizing the or moving the components. Do you see? I still have much left. That's why, hey, if you think this is simple, that's the easy part, because the others is just to make something. Okay, so I will align horizontally the spaced equally. Vertical, I will center, not the center, but the center in the window, not in their own space, while I shrink the width to the smallest and the height I grow to the largest. Everything in one go is what will result all of these combinations, right? It's a lot harder to picture, to predict what you're going to do. That's why, no worries, keep it simple. That you don't understand this, just use the tile. Element menu, components, tile components. By the way, this has a key binding, Shift-Alt-T. And then select, hey, I only want the image, or I want fourth. In this case, I want all of them. And here you have always the components, 4, and the number of rectangles. It's 4 in this case, but it's not limited to always be the same. For instance, if I have 5, like the images, the example I had, which I added the second image, then I need six rectangles. I cannot have 5 rectangles, right? It has to be multiple of 2. That cannot be odd. So by default, it's 2 by 2. Okay, it's a suggestion. Here you go. Now that's easy because they are equally spaced. So I don't have to worry about it's an image, it's not an image component. Do I have to shrink it, to grow it, center vertically. Now, oh, so many functionalities, right? Boom, easy, tile. So when you don't know what to do, use tile, and if you know you need to rearrange, just rearrange. And in this case, let's use one example. That I only want the image, easy. I will just do tile components, only the HTML ones. I want 3 of 1. Here you go. And now I finally edit this manually. So since I don't understand the other stuff, for me it will be quicker. Awesome. And here you go. And now I achieve my goal. That, oh yeah, it's 1 pixel off and so on. Well, you're doing this manually. You can spend your time trying to match the width. Or if you know what you're doing, you select, okay, you go to the drag and drop mode, components, alignment and size. It's just to make my point. Grow to largest, the width. And that, here you go. Now are that the same pixel. No need to be precise as surgeon. So, I know there's a lot of to digest here. I decided to have this in one single video just to make this point. It's more complex than you may think of. You will need to spend some time to understand all of those little features. But there are a lot of, it is already diminishing returns, and it goes to the template kind of things that, hey, don't spend too much time on cosmetics. That's why everything else that we just mentioned, we haven't seen, and the details, all of the combinations will be on the mastery track only, and in extreme detail. Some hours of content. So now it's time to know the order of components. So every element can have components, but those components, even if they are arbitrary, like this, that okay, you have 3, but the image is which, the second or the third, right? I can decide that. So as we have seen, we can have the text show. So what I can achieve is by now visually, I see more or less the order. It's like clockwise. Another thing I can do is open the editor, and I see the same thing. Well, I actually see more stuff. What we have seen is number, type, and registered name on the tags. Here I have even more stuff. Now it's a good case because everything is empty. We will see this later on. What do they mean, when it's useful, and so on. But this is the component order editor dialog, and it's super useful because now the image is the second, I can make it the last one. Here you go. I just click, I keep pressing the left click, and I move it. Now it's the first one. You'll say, oh wow, this is super pointless, right? Now if I click on the tags, now I see that it's 1, 4, 3, and 2. I can actually do the same thing once again. Okay. So now, even though they look the same, I haven't changed how they look, their position, and so on. The position on the element display area. But now, as we always say, is the third. 1 second, my mistake. As we always say, okay. So now, it's a different order. 1, 2, 4, 3, and 3, and the image is number 4. Then, why should you care about this? It's because this will have a massive consequence with some features. For instance, applying templates or editing what's called the first component, the first question component or answer component. We'll still need to know what you mean by the time, question time, answer time, and so on. But just to mention that, hey, this is going to replace the first element, the first component of its type, meaning that, hey, the first image component will be replaced. If there are more, they're not going to be touched, only the first one. And what is the first one? In this case, will be the number 4, because it's the first image component. What about text? It will be this one, welcome to. Now, if I change this around, and I say, if you happen to be happy user, then the one that will be overwritten or deleted will be this one here, not the one I was intending to. That's why the component order is actually super important for those features that we will see in the coming section of the course. It's a big deal. Unless you only do predefined templates, you don't create absolutely anything. So therefore, this case scenario that you have three components of text it won't happen ever. So that's all you need to know for now about the component order, how you can see this order, how you can modify this order, and more or less a big picture of why you should care about this order. We will see dimension returns later on, especially on the mastery track of the course. We're going to see the component order editor, all of the parameters there are. So remember, Ctrl+Shift-O, we have the component order editor. Nice. So we know that ANS, A-N-S, stands for answer, and is true for the last HTML component. Okay. That means that it will be revealed on the answer time. Then, here we have S-Ext, stands for source extra, and is what the element has that which is extra, meaning it's not present in the template. We're going to see this much later in the course. And the other way around, the template extra. So let's say that this element has just one image, then I may apply a template with 2 image components, then I will have a second image component which is empty, and it will be extra because of the text, because of the template. I'm going to mention these two so you know what are those, but the Fluency track, we're not going to cover that. And in the mastery, much later. Then what is left? MCT. This is multiple choice test. So basically, one of the templates for items, you can have, let's actually do one dummy. Okay. If now I apply the multiple choice question, I do this quickly, I know it's dummy. Okay. It's W means it's wrong. Wrong. And here you have one example that the template is extra. Because I created an element that only had front and back, question and answer, and I had the template, and those are existing just because of the template. Awesome. Then if now here, in the number 3, I said MTC is wrong, I say correct, and the one it had the dash is because there was none, I will say wrong. So now we will see this, that is wrong, correct, wrong. That's how you do this template. Okay. Then the type, everything is text. We go to the root. Now I have HTML, that's an image, HTML again, and so on. So basically, what image component, the type of the image component, of the ones you can have here. Remember, you can have rich text, spelling pad, sound, shape, and the obscure ones. No is for the number. You can have up to 100, and then their sequence. Doesn't have to be by the order they are displayed necessarily. And basically here is how you can rearrange. By clicking and dropping, you rearrange the order. Easy. And finally is a registered name. That is the name or title of the registry member of whatever type there is. So Pleasure Learning SuperMemo logo, this is the registered name of the image registry member. Easy. And this is what? HTML registry that doesn't exist, is the text registry. Awesome. Just to let you know that you can customize this, the length, the width, even the order, but this will be lost. So next time that I visit this, it's reset. So now you know all of the attributes there are in the component order editor. What's left to see is actually interpret this when we work with source and template extras via template flags, and that's it. Everything else, it's in. If it's in the answer, it's true. If it's in the any other time, it won't be false. It just says dash. And multiple choice questions, you want tests, you're going only to see this on that specific item template. That's about it. So what's left to see is some other obscure types here. We're going to cover how you can move, cycle. We're going to see how you can navigate through the components. Imagine this case that I have 4 different components in the same element. They're distributed more or less by quarters. It's not necessarily like this. There are different ways. The most, let's say, universal is Ctrl+T. Ctrl+T selects the first component according to the component order. If I press Ctrl+T once again, it goes to the second. Now it's the image. Third and fourth, because in this case I have 4. And once I reach the last one, I go back to the first one. So, in other words, Ctrl+T cycles through the components according to the component order, not how physically they are. So it cycles this order. Welcome to Pleasurable Learning, the picture, you happen to be happy, and as we always say. And once you reach the last, it will repeat the first one. There are some shortcuts you can take. For instance, if I press A, in this case, what's happening? You remember what we have seen so far about the display at? It's because we toggle that. So if I uncheck the on question, now I press A selects the first text component, any text, plain, rich, or HTML text, in the order. That is on the answer side. So in other words, for this, get rich text, plain text, or HTML, which the answer, ANS, is true. In this case, it's the very last one, number 4. I could put it now on the second one. So in this case, if I press A, it will go to the second, but not because it's the second component in the order, it's because it's the very first that is on the answer. Okay. And then I can press Ctrl+T. But hey, Ctrl+T now is a different behavior as before because I have modified the order. For simplicity, let me move this again to the last one. So we have the clock order. Okay. Then if I press A, I go to the answer, which happens to be now the 4th one. So if I press Ctrl+T, I go again to the first one. Let's say I want to go to the image. What I can do is Ctrl+T, T. Here you go. And now I have the border, I know it's selected. You happen to know, especially if it's an item, that is the answer, I just press A and I go there directly. So this is how you navigate through components. And remember, you can always do Ctrl+A, but Ctrl+A is not the component feature, it's an element feature that you trigger and you convert all of the components of that element into editing mode. That will be the case to make sure you see all of the components, because it could be the case that some component is hidden because it's not shown on the browser mode and stuff like that. So just as a precaution, Ctrl+E and then Ctrl+T. Awesome. That's how you can navigate through components by keyboard, and if you want to rely on the mouse, you just click. whatever you want. That you want the menu, right click. You don't have to make it active right away. So now so you see now the HTML component is not selected. I know that because the border is not blue. So if I right click right away, I get the menu. I don't need to make it selected, unlike when I do Ctrl+T. The first I navigate to the precise component. And one tiny detail. If I don't select anything and I want to trigger the menu, which I can, menus and the component, it goes here. Why? Because it gets the first one. Then, just to let you know that you can also right click and do it manually, File, and select next component, Ctrl+T. But you cycle forwards. You cannot go backwards. Yes, you can here select previous component, but there is no direct access. There's no key binding. So usually if you have 4 elements, if you have 4 components, it's still quicker. In worst case scenario, you want the dead last. In this case, it will be Ctrl+T 3 times. That's it. Instead of, yeah, let me select it. So Q. Now I want a menu. It's what? It's a component menu. So Alt F12. Now I want F for file. And now the L for select previous. So yes, I achieved that in one single action, but how many key bindings I did? It's a lot easier to do Ctrl+T. You keep the control, so you just smash the T, and that's it. A lot easier. And it will be really, really unlikely you will have 10 or many components. And if that is the case, just click. It will be easier. So, after we have seen a lot about components, what about how we add them? You can add them indirectly through templates. We will see templates later on in the course, but you can add them manually if you want. So if I set a new topic, absolutely new, an empty, I change the drag and drop. Okay. I want to add an image. There are 2 ways you can do it. On the element menu, the bottom bar, there's the toolbar of Compose, the Compose toolbar. Actually, this is the toolbar I used to showcase the introduction of every single element component type. So you just click. You want an image? Image component. It gets to some place, you just move it on and resize it to what you want. Alternatively, what you could do is go to the main menu, Edit, Add Components, but here you only have a selection of the components: image, sound, video, HTML, text, and a spell. It's more or less the most frequent used that you will do. It's very unlikely you will do video. You'll have a template for video already. And if you ever do it, it will be just to create a video template, and that's it. Same as the spelling. When you want a spelling template, if you don't want to reuse the default one, you will do it, and that's pretty much it, right? So this, I don't suggest this. I suggest always go to the Compose, and you have all of them. This will be the flow. Then my suggestion is always use templates to add the components. Perhaps you need to create a new template, as you will see. And in very rare cases, like I have on my root element, that one of the things you can do with this is like some kind of a dashboard. In this case, it makes sense that, hey, let me add a component, because I'm making this my own, right? It's a special, out of the ordinary. I don't require a template because it's only this item. It's only this element. This is how you add components. Create component. And how you remove them? Right click, delete component. Or Ctrl delete, assuming the component is active. If nothing is active, it will SuperMemo will delete the first component in the order. Super easy, right? Remember, you have to always add. You cannot clone or copy duplicate components, unlike elements. And that's it. There is one convenient element operation that is to swap Q&A. So our utilities will only work with items. Okay, let's do this example. This is actually true. I have used this feature for this, in combination with duplicate, which is usually the case. So it's a key binding for SuperMemo in the inside an HTML component. What Shift-Control-L does? Inserts a bullet point. Okay. Then is, hey, I want the other way around. Ask me how to insert a bullet point in this window and what is the key binding for it, instead of providing the key binding to begin with. So what I can do is duplicate it. Okay, we have it here. It's the same. And now I want to reverse. So what I could do is copy this, paste it there. Now cut this one and paste it here. I achieve the same result. Okay. But what I can do is just, for my convenience, use a swap. So I'm going to do it again. Let me duplicate it. And now I can do the menu, element menu, edit, swap Q&A, Shift-Control-S. Here you go. Those are some requisites. First, you need one text component with the answer to be true. And you need another text component that the answer is not true. So basically, it's on the question time. That's why if you do it on a topic, usually in a topic you'll have only one text component. Text, rich text, or HTML text. Images, all of this is secondary. So it's just those are the requirements. And what the this swap does is the first text component on the question and the first text component on the answer are swapped. Meaning I can have more than one in the answer, like a hint, see also, reference, or whatever. It won't be affected. Then, in this case it was easy because I had two. It's sad, but this is extremely buggy. Now, if I have this one, I will make a copy of my main element. I1, let's see what it would be. It will be the first and the third, as we always say, because it's the answer. As we always say, this one. So this should be at the bottom, and as we always say, at the bottom, at the top. Let's see what happens. Remember, I can also use the key binding, Shift-Control-S. Hey, it worked. So I had other components, but I am only affecting the first one of each. Awesome. So as long as you take care of the component order, as I did, nothing to worry about. And just to make my point, here it's the multiple choice question. But remember, one has the answer as true, the very first one. So what's going to happen if I do Ctrl+Shift+S? I have shifted the question with the answer, being the first one. So usually here it's pointless. And by the way, I can keep doing it. Do you see now it's at the top, the very first one, the second, and the first one. Meaning it's commutative. If I switch back and forth, I come full circle. But the multiple choice question doesn't make sense to do this. Awesome. So that's all you need to know about switching Q&A in SuperMemo. So far we have seen how to add components, navigate components, and so on. But what about deleting them? So I don't want to delete the entire element, just, let's say, the image or one text. Okay. So first, let me duplicate this. This is a copy. Let's say I don't want the image. I can just unselect the image from the registry and link it. So therefore, I will have the image component empty. Like this. Do you see the component is still there? It's just empty. But no. I want to be removed. You right click and delete component. As easy as that. Now it's no longer there. This is especially true if you want to rearrange, an element case by case. So this element in particular won't follow any template because I want to maximize the space and so on. Could be an image, could be text, could be a special component, whatever. And I want to be like this, right? Now it's unique, and if I really want to reuse that, I will save it as template, as you will see later. Awesome. If I go back to the original, it's still there. I'm only affecting this very same element. There's some complexity here, because if I had a template and I remove a component, it will happen that, hey, is this component native or is this component added via template? Depending on the case, what they do, and also according to what's called the template flags, could be the case that I'm removing component for every single element that is using this template, which is something you may not want to do. Perhaps you do, perhaps you don't. What is the key is that you are knowledgeable of what you're doing. And again, we'll do it on the template section. Then I can get rid of them one by one. Delete component, delete component, delete component. I'll have one. I can also delete it. So now I have an element with no components. It's completely empty. This has the same effect than applying done, we will see that removes all of the contents, but there's a nuisance that we'll see later on. It's not exactly the same. Just to let you know for now that if there was hierarchy down, so let me duplicate it once again. Now what I will do is apply done, something we'll see later on, and I have the same effect. I got rid of everything, every single component. This is just to make my point. Usually what you will do, this is a flow in incremental reading that we will see, but you will just do one by one. That, hey, I want to get rid of the image, stuff like that, delete component. Or you accidentally added that, oops, you were reading, let me decompose the book, it's oopsie. I added one component unwillingly, by accident. There's no undo, right? Doesn't work. Well, right click and delete the component right away. Another use case. So that's more or less how you delete components manually. Just to let you know that in the mastery track, we will see some use cases that you can delete components in bulk, many elements at once, and with some criteria, with some conditionals. If this is delete it. If it's not, keep it, according to what's called template flags. But for the Fluency, that's everything you need to know. Right click, delete, or Control delete, and that's about it. So, did you know that everything in SuperMemo is a file? Well, simplifying a little, it's not exactly like that. Some exceptions do apply. But to simplify, everything is linked to a file. That means that, hey, I have an image of a logo. I can actually see the image in from my computer. Do you see it's in the C drive, SuperMemo systems, learning, I can right click, File, View File, or pressing F9. And I will see it on my default app for images. Here you go. Same for text. I can press F9 and I will see and I will open it with my default, which now it's Chrome. And do you see it's an HTML file? Here I don't see the color because the CSS is applied only on SuperMemo, not here. Okay. This is universal, almost universal. So regardless of the component type, I will be able to open it because I have this stored in my collection inside the elements folder. Some exceptions do apply. For instance, you remember this one, if you happen to be a happy user, more or less on my head. This is a plain text now, because it's the border, it's yellow. Meaning that if I press F9, and just to make my point, do you see? First, I get the same styling, the same color and so on, the same font size, background color, even the border. But if you pay attention, this is generated. It's a temporary file that is just plain text.html that every time that I will press F9 to an HTML component which only contains text, it will be generated. That is because there's no file. It is just a member of the text registry. So something we have said before in the dedicated video, that this is an HTML component with HTML text, and this is an HTML component with plain text. We could say that this is actually linking an HTML file, and the yellow border, it's linking a text registry member instead. And remember, this is just a view file. We have edit, view source, and stuff like that. But this is for now the most universal one, view file. It always works, regardless of the component type. And if it doesn't, SuperMemo will create a temporary file anyways. There's one final thing for the Fluency track of the course, is that usually the images, or sounds, let's say, you want to paste them, right, from the clipboard. But especially the images, they lose quality. This is built in because back in the day, the memory was very scarce, so they had to maximize the space. And it has been left, it's left over. So one of the ways that you can guarantee quality, you don't compress an image, is by importing from your computer. How you do that? So let me go to some place. Okay, like this, I have an empty image component. So the image component is there, I don't need to create it, but I want to add an image, and instead of doing copy pasting from the clipboard, I will just do Ctrl+Q, or right click the component, file, and import file. This could be the case if the last time you used a folder that no longer exists. No worries. And now you just select the image you want. So I go to the D drive. Oh my god. Here you go. And then you select the image. In this case, it's a good example because when you compress an image, especially the text, it's rather easy to tell that the quality has been dramatically decreased. Then I'm not going to focus on the details of what I just did. It's just this feature that is not limited to images. You could do import file for anything. This is not limited to images. You could do for other component types. What's the use case? Is when you know you have the file locally in your device, unlike on the internet, or for the images, you want to preserve the quality. There's another way. So remember, you right click, or you select the component and Ctrl+Q. If you do it again, so it's already filled, and I do another one, let's say my face, what you're going to do is to replace it. Remember that. In the mastery track, we'll see the details, the flows, the pros, the cons, and so on. And we will revisit at least the images in the Fluency track. Other than images, it will be only on the mastery track. That's all for now. See you incrementally.